My manager humiliated me in front of everyone, but he had no idea who was watching. I used to think the most humiliating moment of my career was the day my manager screamed at me in front of the entire warehouse. I was wrong. The yelling, the insults. 30 pairs of eyes staring at me while nobody said a word. None of that was the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later, when I realized I hadn't been singled out because I was a bad employee. I had been chosen because I was the one person least likely to fight back. At the time, I didn't understand that. I thought maybe I just wasn't working hard enough. Maybe I wasn't moving fast enough. Maybe if I stayed later, volunteered for overtime, and kept my head down, things would eventually get better. Instead, the harder I worked, the more my manager seemed determined to embarrass me. Every shift felt like walking into a boxing ring where only one person was allowed to throw punches. Before every shift, I'd sit in my car outside the warehouse for 10 minutes with the engine running. I'd stare at the entrance and tell myself the same thing. It's only 10 hours. You need the paycheck. Just get through today. Some mornings, convincing myself to walk through those doors was harder than the work itself. The warehouse wasn't the problem. The work wasn't the problem. The problem had a name. Rick. Rick became our warehouse manager about 6 months before everything happened. Upper management loved him. Our production numbers improved almost immediately. Orders shipped faster, overtime dropped, reports looked great. To corporate, Rick looked like a miracle. To the people working under him, he was a nightmare. He believed respect came from fear. Every morning he gathered us around the production board. If you miss your quota, he'd say, you're making everyone else work harder. If I have to babysit adults, we've hired the wrong people. Nobody answered. Nobody ever answered. Rick wasn't interested in conversations. He preferred performances. If someone loaded the wrong pallet, he'd make sure everyone heard about it. If a scanner froze, he'd ask why the employee was standing around getting paid. If a truck left late, someone was getting blamed, whether it was their fault or not. After a while, everyone developed the same habit. Keep your head down, avoid eye contact, hope today wasn't your turn. Unfortunately, it was usually mine. I wasn't the fastest worker, but I wasn't the slowest either. Before Rick arrived, my annual review described me as dependable, reliable, a team player. I trained new hires, covered extra shifts, rarely called in sick. I honestly thought doing good work would protect me. Instead, it seemed to paint a target on my back. Then came Tuesday morning, a morning that started like every other shift and ended with everyone in the warehouse watching my manager try to destroy my reputation. It was just after 8. Forklifts crisscrossed the loading docks. Conveyor belts rattled endlessly. Scanners beeped from every direction. Drivers waited impatiently for outbound trailers. The place was loud enough that people usually had to shout just to hear each other. I was scanning inventory for a shipment when my handheld scanner suddenly froze. I restarted it. Nothing. I swapped the battery. Still nothing. I called IT. They told me someone would be over in a couple of minutes. So I stepped beside my pallet and waited. Less than a minute later, someone shouted my name, Daniel. The voice cut through every other sound in the warehouse. Conversation stopped. Forklifts slowed. People turned. I looked up. Rick was already walking toward me. Fast. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow him. For one brief second, I actually thought he was coming to ask what had happened. I couldn't have been more wrong. He stopped only a few feet away. What exactly are you doing? He shouted. My scanner stopped working, I replied. I said someone's coming. He grabbed the scanner out of my hand, pressed one button, looked at the blank screen for barely a second, then tossed it back onto the pallet. Excuses. His voice echoed across the warehouse. That's all I ever hear from you. I kept my voice calm. It really isn't working. He ignored me. Instead, he turned toward everyone else. You see this? He pointed directly at me. This is exactly why some people never improve. They always have an excuse. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could feel dozens of people watching me. Some looked uncomfortable, others stared at the floor. A few simply looked away. Rick stepped closer. If you can't even do something this simple, maybe we should replace you with someone who actually wants to work. For a moment, I could feel my heart pounding. Every instinct told me to defend myself, to argue, to tell everyone the scanner was dead. Instead, I took a slow breath. Then I looked him in the eyes. I'll gladly discuss my performance when you're ready to speak to me respectfully. Silence. Complete silence. Rick blinked. It was obvious he hadn't expected that answer. Then he laughed. Oh, so now you're teaching me how to manage? I didn't answer. I simply picked up the scanner, walked toward the IT office, and kept walking. Behind me, I could still hear Rick shouting. I never looked back. I didn't know it then, but quietly walking away had just made me his next target. Who actually wants to work. For a moment, I could feel my heart pounding. Every instinct told me to defend myself, to argue, to tell everyone the scanner was dead. Instead, I took a slow breath. Then I looked him in the eyes. I'll gladly discuss my performance when you're ready to speak to me respectfully. Silence. Complete silence. Rick blinked. It was obvious he hadn't expected that answer. Then he laughed. Oh, so now you're teaching me how to manage? I didn't answer. I simply picked up the scanner, walked toward the IT office, and kept walking. Behind me, I could still hear Rick shouting. I never looked back. I didn't know it then, but quietly walking away had just made me his next target. Behind me, I could still hear Rick shouting. I never looked back. I didn't know it then, but quietly walking away had just made me his next target. Walking away was the easiest decision I made that day. Living with the consequences wasn't. By the following Monday, Rick had found new ways to remind me that he was in charge. My schedule changed without explanation. The overtime I had already signed up for suddenly disappeared. Instead of working in receiving, where I had spent most of the past year, I was assigned to the oldest section of the warehouse. The equipment there broke constantly. The orders were heavier. The production goals stayed exactly the same. It didn't take long to notice the pattern. Every difficult assignment somehow landed on my schedule. Every time something went wrong, Rick seemed to be nearby. Coincidence? Maybe once. Not every day. One afternoon, I overheard him talking to another supervisor. He'll quit eventually, Rick said. They always do. I froze behind the shelving. He wasn't talking about poor performers. He was talking about me. That was the moment I realized something. He wasn't trying to improve me. He was trying to wear me down. For the first time, I seriously considered resigning. Every lunch break became another job search. Every evening, I updated my resume. I imagined walking into Rick's office, placing my resignation letter on his desk, and never coming back. But every time I looked at my mortgage payment, my car loan, my daughter's school tuition, reality won. I couldn't just walk away. So instead, I changed something else. I stopped reacting. If Rick criticized me, I answered politely. If he interrupted me, I waited until he finished speaking. If he tried embarrassing me in front of everyone, I gave him nothing. No arguments, no raised voice, no angry expression, just calm professionalism. Oddly enough, that seemed to frustrate him even more. A few weeks later, an older coworker named Carlos sat beside me during lunch. He had worked at the warehouse for almost 20 years. He wasn't someone who talked much. That day, he looked at me and quietly asked, "Do you know why he keeps picking you?" I shrugged. "I guess he doesn't like me." Carlos shook his head. "No. He picks people who won't fight back." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He knows the hotheads will file complaints. He knows the loud guys will yell back. But people like you," he pointed at me with his fork, "stay professional. He thinks you'll just take it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe Carlos was wrong. Another part of me knew he wasn't. Then something unexpected happened. A woman from HR walked through the warehouse with a clipboard. Nobody thought much of it. HR visited every few months. Usually it meant policy updates or safety training. This time felt different. Over the next week, several employees were quietly asked into private meeting rooms. Nobody knew why. Rumors spread everywhere. Someone whispered that corporate was cutting jobs. Another person claimed the warehouse was being audited. Rick acted like nothing was happening. If anything, he became even more aggressive. One Friday morning, he yelled at a new employee for scanning the wrong pallet. The kid looked like he was ready to cry. Rick made him stand beside the production board while everyone walked past. I recognized that feeling. Humiliation. That afternoon, I received an email. HR wanted to meet with me. I honestly expected the worst. Maybe Rick had written me up. Maybe I was finally getting fired. Instead, the HR representative smiled and closed the door. "We'd just like to hear about your experience working here." That was it. No accusations, no pressure, just questions. "Has anyone treated you disrespectfully? Have you ever felt intimidated? Have you experienced retaliation?" I answered honestly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult Rick. I simply described what had happened: the public yelling, the broken scanner, the schedule changes, the lost overtime, the constant attempts to embarrass me. The HR representative wrote everything down. Then she asked one final question. "Do you think you're the only employee this has happened to?" I thought for a moment. "No. I think I'm just the one he does it to the most." She nodded. "Thank you." That meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. I assumed nothing would come from it. I was wrong. The following week, Rick looked different. Still loud, still demanding, but nervous. He kept disappearing into meetings. Regional managers I'd never seen before walked through the warehouse with notebooks. They weren't watching production. They were watching people. Then they watched the security cameras. They reviewed work schedules, performance evaluations, overtime records, employee complaints, exit interviews, everything. One Monday morning, Rick didn't show up. Nobody mentioned it. Everyone simply started working. Around 10 o'clock, an email appeared in everyone's inbox. It was only 2 sentences long. "Effective immediately, Rick is no longer employed by the company. Please report to Interim Operations Manager Lisa Reynolds until further notice." That was it. No explanation. No goodbye. The warehouse felt strangely quiet. People smiled more. They talked without looking over their shoulders. For the first time in months, nobody seemed afraid of making a mistake. A week later, I was asked to meet with the regional operations manager. I expected a follow-up interview. Instead, he asked me a question. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you think Rick targeted you?" I gave the same answer I'd been giving myself for months. "I guess he thought I wasn't good enough." The manager slowly shook his head. "No." He leaned forward. "We reviewed your performance. You were one of the highest rated employees in the warehouse before Rick arrived." I stared at him. He continued. "We interviewed more than 30 employees. We noticed a pattern." I waited. "Rick never targeted the weakest workers. He targeted the strongest employees who were least likely to fight back." I felt my stomach tighten. The manager continued. "If someone known for working hard can be humiliated in front of everyone, everyone else becomes afraid. It creates control. It wasn't about performance, it was about fear." Suddenly everything made sense. The overtime, the public criticism, the impossible assignments, the yelling. It had never been because I was failing. It had been because I stayed calm, because I remained professional, because I refused to give him the confrontation he wanted. The regional manager smiled. "You know what finally exposed him?" I shook my head. "You." I looked confused. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly." He smiled again. "You didn't yell back. You didn't threaten him. You didn't give him a reason to blame you. You stayed professional." And that forced us to look at the facts instead of the emotions. For months, I had believed staying calm made me an easy target. Instead, it became the reason the truth was finally impossible to ignore. Looking back now, I don't think winning meant Rick lost his job. Winning meant I didn't lose myself trying to survive someone else's anger. Some managers believe fear creates respect. Real leaders know respect is earned long before anyone raises their voice. I still work in that warehouse today. The quotas are still demanding. The work is still exhausting. But one thing never returned after Rick left: the silence that came from fear. And every now and then, when I see a new employee looking nervous during their first week, I make a point of introducing myself, because I know how much a little kindness can matter. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do at work isn't proving someone wrong. It's refusing to let them change the kind of person you are. First week, I make a point of introducing myself, because I know how much a little kindness can matter. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do at work isn't proving someone wrong. It's refusing to let them change the kind of person you are.